Aloha and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this news conference from the Hawaii State Teachers Association. I'm HSTA Communications Director Keoki Kerr. We're excited to have a panel of teachers and teacher leaders here today to talk to you about our concerns and our request for the state to delay a return of students to campuses. They're scheduled to return on August 4th. We're going to hear from 4 of our teacher leaders here today. We also welcome folks listening across the state, our HSTA members, members of the public, parents, and other members of the community. While you can certainly feel free to comment in Facebook and on YouTube, we're not passing along those comments to our panel today. We have reporters who are in a Zoom call, and they're going to be asking questions of our panelists today. We know that everybody couldn't join us live, so if folks want to hear this later, they can of course listen on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page anytime and see this entire presentation. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel here. We're going to first hear from Corey Rosenlee, who is the HSTA president. He's also a Campbell High School social studies teacher. Then we're going to hear a few remarks from HSTA vice president Osa Tui Jr., who's the registrar at McKinley High School. Then from Shannon, who is a Fern Elementary School special education preschool teacher. And then Brandon Cha, who is a Pearl City High School science teacher. And then they're going to answer questions from reporters. So I'd like to start things off with Corey, the HSTA president.
Aloha, I'm Corey Rosenlee, president of the Hawaii State Teachers Association. A month ago, HSTA and the DOE met to try to plan on how to reopen our schools. We came to an agreement, a memorandum of understanding. Within that MOU, there were policies, practices, and promises made by the DOE that would occur before our schools began. Since that MOU, we have asked the DOE multiple times for answers to our questions and still have not gotten those answers. Yet we plan on opening our schools shortly. Given these unanswered questions, and that teachers are supposed to report soon, HSTA has no confidence that our schools are ready, our school buildings are ready to open for our students. HSTA is asking the Board of Education and the state of Hawaii to delay the opening of school buildings to our students. Our schools need more time to be able to create a healthy environment for our students and our teachers. Opening our schools quickly is not something we should do in a pandemic. What is the rush? While the HSTA has continued to work with the DOE in good faith, there are still questions that we have. First of all, when will the state of Hawaii's Department of Health provide written guidance on the reopening of school buildings, which the DOE agreed to in our MOU? Just this week, Health Director Bruce Anderson told lawmakers that they still haven't even created a committee on this issue, yet they want to open our schools. Next question, what options are available to families seeking 100% distance learning options for their children? The department has provided no guidance for K-5 students to be able to access 100% distance learning options. Many parents, when they have inquired with their schools, have been told no options of what they can do. And the DOE still has not advertised this option to parents. There are no clear protocols when it comes to face mask use. And what we've heard from teachers is that it runs the gamut across the state, where some schools are going to require it and others are not going to discipline students for not having it on. HSTA believes that face masks must be worn, and that must be enforced on our campuses. One of the big questions that still has not been answered is, what happens to the students and adults on a school campus if a student, teacher, or other school employee, or one of their household members tests positive for COVID-19? Before we begin bringing students on campus, this is a question that must be answered and be clear for everyone to understand about what are the procedures in case someone contracts this virus. The next question, what standard practices and additional personal protective equipment methods should be followed by employees who need to get within 6 feet of others, especially students who are medically fragile or very young? That has not been answered. Next question. How will schools determine that newly enrolled students, especially those from military households, followed 14 days of proper self-isolation upon arrival in Hawaii? Next question. When a school needs to shut down due to COVID-19 infection, how will schools move to a 100% distance learning environment? And when will teachers be trained? We know that from day one, even before day one, there may be cases at a school. And before we bring students on campus, it should be very clear what are the procedures to move to a potentially 100% distance learning environment. And that has not occurred. We have heard from the Department of Health, and they have discussed things such as Ohana bubbles. I can tell you from the teachers that have listened to this, this is divorced from reality. At the secondary level, we have hundreds of kids that are going to be changing classes, and teachers will be exposed to hundreds of students. I will tell you as a teacher, before school, at lunch, after school, these kids will be taking off their masks, they'll be close proximity with each other, and then we're going to put them in a confined area with teachers for long periods of day. And for our young students, even though they may be in one class per day, their Ohana bubble is 1, waiting for the bus, 2, when they get on the bus, 3, when they get to school and start playing around with their friends, 4, when they're in the school, 5, when they go to the bathroom, then their A+ program, and then they go back home to their family, and their family's weekends. And by the end of the day, many, they've been exposed to many people, and then we're bringing this into the classroom. When this concern was shared at a Senate hearing, Bruce Anderson, he said this, I want to quote this, okay? He said, the disease is far more serious for older people. That doesn't necessarily help the teachers. I cannot tell you how upsetting it is to be discounted by the health director. Our teachers have to be taken seriously, and their health has to be taken seriously. And to be discounted is something that is frustrating for all of our teachers. We are 2 weeks away from our buildings being open to students, yet critical questions still are unanswered. Educators are still confused and unclear about the measures needed to open up our schools. We need to take our time and get things right. And while this is all occurring, we've been talking about how important our teachers are, how important our vulnerable students are. At the same time they're talking about opening schools, this Thursday, the Board of Education is talking about cutting teachers' pay. This year, we have dealt with the issue of differentials for pay for special education, for hard to staff, and Hawaiian immersion. Students that oftentimes have substitutes and emergency hires teaching them. And I want to ask, how is a substitute supposed to deal with online learning and deal with the situation? And what happens when a substitute goes from class to class exposed to many students too? So instead of retaining our high quality teachers in these environments, the Board of Education has to deal with potentially suspending differential pay. That is not where we should be heading. This program has been successful, nearly cutting the teacher shortage by 25% in 1 year. This is something that we need to keep. So what we are asking from HSTA is every single parent, every student, every teacher, we need to tell the Board of Education that they should delay the opening of school buildings to our students. This will give us the time for our teachers to prepare and to make sure that we take every step possible to make sure that our classrooms and our schools are safe. So with that, we're asking people to send in testimony. You guys did a great job last time doing that. And for those of you that need to, the email address is, and I will say this out loud, okay? It is testimony.boe@boe.hawaii.gov, and it's in the email we sent to you. And if you could share that with everyone, we need everyone in our community to be able to take this very seriously. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Corey. Next, we're going to hear from Osa Tui Jr., who is HSTA's Vice President, and he is the Registrar at McKinley High School. Osa?
Aloha. Once again, I'm Osa Tui, Registrar at McKinley High School and Vice President of the Hawaii State Teachers Association. Our teachers and administrators are bending over backwards to make this agreement work. But it's time to face the music. Leadership at all levels, except those at the very top, are privately expressing to us that it's a plan that's being implemented too soon. We have 4 days before students begin. That's nothing different from any other year where we get 4 days before students begin. An extraordinary amount of work is needed to prepare for this year, especially if our schools have to close suddenly due to COVID-19. Schools are trying their best with teachers and administrators collaborating. And just when we got a solid agreement on 6 feet, which is the absolute norm, we see that athletics will be starting up again. How does that work with the bubbles? As a registrar at my school where we enroll students, we're worried about enrolling them from out of state, out of country. There's no guidance on how to handle these and so many other situations. Hawaii's low numbers have been touted, but that's because we've had good practice so far. And it's painfully obvious that what is about to happen is not good practice. Our parents see it, and they're finding other options now for their children. When the department sent out the family survey and asked, what do you prefer? Heck, even teachers prefer to go back to normal. But it's not about that. The survey should have said, what's the likelihood that you're going to send your child back to school with cases on the rise? Our teachers see it, and they're going to have to do what they need to do to save their lives, the lives of their families, and the lives of their keiki, and the lives of all our keiki throughout the state. We made a wise decision to pause the reopening of our state, and it's time we need to make a wise decision to pause the reopening of our school buildings.
Thank you, Osa. Next, we're going to hear from Shannon Ka'a'a. She's a special education preschool teacher at Fern Elementary School in Kalihi. Shannon?
Hi, aloha. I'm Shannon Ka'a'a. I'm a preschool special education teacher at Fern Elementary in Kalihi on the island of Oahu. You know, over the summer, the principal at my school, like all the other principals, has been working hard to design a plan to reopen the school. He shared those plans and has provided updates as things change with our teachers over email and at voluntary meetings. The principals have done their best to comply with the DOE directives as they come down, but our schools are not prepared to open. Our teachers are not prepared. Teachers are scheduled to return to work 4 days prior to the students' return. That's the same amount of preparation time as in the past, but that is not enough time to address the changes that are needed. You know, the DOE has a plethora of information on their website, but teachers and staff need time to unpack that information. So we not only know what is expected, but also how to do it. As a teacher of preschool children with special needs, I, like many other special education teachers, am especially concerned about the lack of guidance we've received to safely care for our students with special needs. We need time to get the guidance. We need time to develop protocols, and we need time to collaborate and share our plans with the other people who work with our students with special needs. You know, all the teachers want to open our schools and be with students, but we need to do it safely for our students, for our teachers, for our school staff, and for the community. On a personal note, I have a medical condition that has weakened my immune system. So although the Department of Health is okay with an expected increase of COVID cases, I'm not. We need more time to open the school safely.
Thank you, Shannon. And finally, we're going to hear from Brandon Cha, who is a science teacher at Pearl City High School. Hi, Brandon.
Hi, Kyoki. Thanks for introducing me. Again, I'm Brandon Cha. I teach freshman science in the 9th grade at Pearl City High School. And just for reference, I live with a family member who is at an increased risk factor for COVID-19 as well. I just want to reiterate what everyone before me has already said so eloquently. Like what Shannon said, principals have been prepping to the best of their abilities to make sure that schools will run smoothly when students return. And I thank them, my principal, and everyone else for that. But this is a much more complex issue than simply going to the grocery store or going to Costco. You all may have seen that stores have things now like plexiglass where you interact with staff, and teachers aren't being provided that in our own classrooms. You have limited contact with a given person at a store, but teachers will be with the same group of students for possibly up to 6 or 7 hours every day. It's true, what Dr. Park has said about the idea of Ohana bubbles, but as Corey said, we have more than one Ohana bubble. And it's also true that the DOE really hasn't made clear how to handle closing classrooms or entire schools if an Ohana bubble becomes infected. The DOE said that schools have to contact the Department of Health if a certain amount of students in a school or classroom get infected, but how many infected students does it take to outright close a classroom or a school? For example, just consider if a single student from my classroom gets COVID, will all of my students suddenly have to learn from home through distance learning and self-isolate? Will the entire school shut down? Can the state guarantee how quickly my students' peers' parents will be notified of relevant infections? What if a family member of a teacher or a student gets infected and then the teacher or student of that family member goes to school? What happens if it's a coworker of a student's parent? And more importantly, I think to me, who will shoulder the blame if a student, family, or school staff member gets infected or dies because of COVID, and it can be proved to be traced back to school transmission? These are important plans that need to be clearly spelled out in all of their ramifications and consequences and communicated to both school staff and parents who will inevitably be on the front lines. We heard from the Department of Education that the Department of Health would put out written guidance on the reopening of school buildings. We haven't seen that yet. It has not been provided to us. A few days ago, like Corey said, Bruce Anderson said that they're going to now convene a panel of experts to determine the trigger points for opening and closing schools. But we are already within 2 weeks of schools reopening for teachers. That's just too late for all of this to be happening. The DOE also claims that students will have access to a 100% distance learning option, but to date, nothing has been published by the DOE on how this option would be accessed or utilized by families. Some reports from school principals have redirected families to eSchool as the official platform that middle and high school students could use, and that's simply not true. eSchool is only a supplementary program, and it's not designed or approved to replace the curriculum that you would get from a teacher teaching your student, whether at school or at home. The department has provided no guidance for elementary students in regards to accessing 100% distance learning options, and I personally have heard that other principals have outright stated they will not be offering any at-home learning option to parents who are requesting it. The superintendent gets asked if teachers have been having training on all of these COVID protocols and procedures, and we're one of the first school districts in the nation to be welcoming students back. And I'll tell you the frontline truth as a teacher, I've not had any teaching being offered to me, and even if it were, teachers are on summer break. So any training that we would have had would have been optional at best. And the training that we are hearing from the superintendent is probably just scattered. And those who are interested in taking it upon themselves or have the time over the summer, if they're not working a second job, to go ahead and get that training. So I can say it's definitely not widespread for all teachers. Some people within the department will point out that teachers do get 4 days of student-free prep time at the start of the year, and that could be used to learn and train about these procedures. But as Osa pointed out before me, that's what we get in a typical year, normally. This is a year of a pandemic. And what we're dealing with and what teachers are being asked to modify for, not just for our ease of teaching, but for the safety of our students, is way more than what we can accomplish, I believe, safely in 4 days. 2 of those days are devoted to all-day faculty meetings with teachers. we only get 2 of those 4 days in our classroom to do the work that we need to do, physically setting up or lesson planning to make sure that our students can learn and learn safely. There are people who say that we have the first 9 days with students to prepare for these things, such as digital learning, because half the day is split with students and half the day is split with staff. But that's after students are already back in school. That's too late. We need thorough prep time before students come back to our buildings to adequately plan for them and our safety. I'll just close by saying that we as teachers are being asked to make a choice between our safety and our duty to our students. And frankly, that's a false choice that we have to make. Fear and uncertainty are forcing the self-interest of teachers and parents to come into conflict, which is really ironic because at the heart of it, teachers always, and parents, we both want what's safe and fair for our students and for ourselves. We want schools to open, but we want to do it safely. We want a specific plan given to principals and teachers, and then passed on to our students' parents about how school's going to reopen safely. And until we get that, we are asking to delay students returning to physical school buildings. And when you think about the consequences that could come out of this, prioritizing our students' safety is not asking for that much in the whole scope of things. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Brandon. We know our reporters have some questions, so I'm going to be calling on you here in order. I'm going to ask Jen Boniza from KHON2. You're up first, and can you please unmute yourself and let us know who you'd like to ask a question to.
Thanks, Keoki. I'd like to ask Corey Rosenlee a question. So Corey, I know you guys have all mentioned that you have 4 days to prepare with students. How much more time do you think the teachers will need in there alone without any students to prepare? And then the second question would be, what happens if the state decides to move forward despite your pleas?
So to your first question, rather than be prescriptive and put a day on it, and that's where I think we failed in many ways. The day of August 4th is arbitrary. It's not based on what the science says of when it's best to open up our schools. I think the first thing we have to do is make sure that it's safe, that our teachers feel comfortable, that the teachers feel trained. And then when those things have occurred, then we move on to the next question. We have to bring on our students to the same place where our parents and our students feel safe. And so rather than just putting 1 day and then focus on that, I think that's our problem to begin with. And to the second question you asked about what's next, I think the first action we have to see is this. The Board of Education last time was very concerned about the health and safety of our students and our teachers. And they asked that the Department of Education, HSTA, come together. And when we did, we were able to clear up the 6 feet of social distancing between our desks. And I think that they have to also be asking the department to be able to deal with some of these issues and to give guidance. And that's something I think the leaders of our state need to do too. One of the worst things that we can do is rush to open up our schools and just increase the number of people that get infected. I think that would just lead to what's happened in other places of the entire school system going down. It's better to be slow and deliberate rather than rushing it and then having everything to close down. And I think the message out to some of the parents that are so desperate to have their kids back in school, as teachers of the state of Hawaii, we get it. Our teachers want to be back in our classrooms. We miss our students. And so I think that it's so important that if we can't just say what we want to do and realize that the virus doesn't have a say in this, and it does. So we have to take this step by step.
Thanks, Jen. Next, we have Lisa Kubota from Hawaii News Now. Lisa.
Hi, this question is for Corey. I know you indicated not setting a specific date, but if there isn't a date, how is the state then able to plan, since the pre-testing program for travelers is now, hinging on September 1st? And then what about working parents who need that childcare and may not be able to be there for distance learning due to their jobs?
Yeah, and to that point, we totally empathize with parents. I'm a parent. I recognize the situation, and for a lot of parents, they have at the current moment, they're dealing with the same thing during summer, and so that is an issue that we have to deal with. But I'll tell you that as a parent, I would rather have a delay than a sick child. I think what Brandon mentioned before, a lot of our teachers are worried, and students are worried about Hawaii has the highest rate of multi-generational homes. And while children are the ones that may not get sick, there's still not a lot of good data on how they potentially could carry it on to older family members. And so, you know, the need might be there, but how do we do this in a gradual process? And so again, we're not going to send a specific date because these questions haven't been answered. If we set a specific date and those questions still have been answered, then, you know, what's the point at this point? I think we have to make sure that each question is answered and that our teachers are prepared. And that's the benchmarks that we need to set up.
Okay, next we hear from Siobhan Lee from Civil Beat.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, Siobhan.
Great, thank you. Corey, first of all, I just want to piggyback off one of the first questions because I'm not sure I heard an answer there. What is the HSTA planning to do if the August 4th date remains fixed and it's not pushed back? Secondly, related to that, would you support any kind of differentiated school reopening plan? Because as you know, some schools have a small number of students and are very remote locations, so they might be able to safely bring back students and teachers might feel the same way. So would you support something like that in which we're not talking about one single uniform framework, but a different system of frameworks? Thanks.
Okay, so to your first point, I think that we want to see what the Board of Action does on Thursday. After that, we'll have to look at different options. And there are certain things that have been looked at in other places that we may have to consider as well. But we always want to give the opportunity to the Board of Education and to the governor and to other leaders of the state to make sure that their thoughts are clearly articulated as well. To your second question, Asuyan, your second question again, if you can remind me, was?
Sure, just real briefly to recap that. It was
oh yes, I remember, about
differentiated. Yeah.
Yes. So I think that's a great conversation to have. And I think if there's a baseline of certain practices that have been shared, have parents been informed about their right to do distance learning? Have teachers been trained on distance learning? Because even if you don't have a large infection system right now, I mean, what we've seen in the state is the second you start opening up things increase. So we have to make sure that, first of all, that parents are aware of their option to do 100% distance learning. We have dealt with the question of teachers that are in high-risk areas, that our teachers have been trained. And then the next step we can talk about is, okay, should the same rules apply? But we haven't even gotten guidance from the Department of Health of what is the criteria of when schools should be shut down. I mean, you think before day one of any student or teacher showing up on campus, that kind of answer needs to be shared, and that has not been. So, you know, we're asked to figure out what's going to be happening next, but we haven't even taken the first step yet. And that's why, you know, HSTA is asking for this delay of students coming on campus.
Okay, and next we are going to hear from Ashley Mizuo from Hawaii Public Radio.
Hi, thanks so much. Can you hear me okay? I think. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. So my question is basically what exactly kind of training has been done and guidance has been sent out to teachers and principals so far? And anecdotally or either way, do you guys know if principals have been able to secure the PPE needed to, you know, clean, sanitize? I know some were talking about potentially providing some disposable masks for kids who forget it. Yeah.
Shannon, why don't you take that question first, because you're going to be on the front line there. You need to unmute. Yes, so go ahead.
Okay. Well, in terms of professional development opportunities, there were a few opportunities offered during the summer to teachers. There were emails that were sent out. And, if you happen to have seen the emails and checked on them, then you were able to take advantage. I personally took advantage of a summer learning class, was able to see a group of teachers do a distance learn who were preschool to first grade. And then I was able to kind of watch that and get some ideas of how I might be able to manage that and do something on my own. So that was self-directed. There was no compensation for it. And I'm not sure if everybody realizes that teachers actually do not get paid summer. I have seen some comments come up on Facebook about why teachers haven't been spending the summer to prepare. But basically, the DOE has not invested in any of that in terms of professional development. Yes, they did host it, some classes that were put on by teacher leaders. Our school also had a cohort of teachers that shared some applications that we were able to learn how to maybe set up our own website, how to set up a classroom. And for teachers like me, you know, I'm an immigrant to technology, so this is a huge lift. So I'm very grateful, and I have taken those opportunities, but they all are on our own time. There is no compensation for it. It is kind of a hit and miss thing. So in terms of professional development, it's been very limited. In terms of guidance, I've spent hours and hours of going onto the DOE's website and looking at their Return to Learn plan, clicking on those different tabs, diving into the reading, going into the other tabs, trying to read and trying to get as much information as I can. You know, most teachers are planners, and so we are always looking for information. And the problem is that, you know, the DOE is very set on school bringing decisions making down to the school level. And so they'll put out some guidance, but nothing very clear in terms of how to do it. So schools are all left to figure it out. The schools then leave it to the teachers to figure out. So I'm not sure that really answers all what you've asked, but there's been very limited opportunities for professional development and guidance. And basically, I do not believe that the DOE has invested and been willing to invest in bringing teachers back during the summer to help guide us. I do want to say, though, that the principal at our school has been open to supporting us with a small stipend to spend time to work on those professional development and learning from colleagues.
If I can jump in too, it's not been uniform across the state. We have teachers that reported they haven't been even offered training, that they have not gotten it. So it's spotty, and it's not something that should be spotty. Potentially we have to go to 100% distance learning. I don't know if Brandon, you wanted to add anything onto that. You're muted, Brandon.
Thanks, Corey. I knew that was going to happen at some point in the meeting. You know, Ashley, I think it was you who asked this current question. Teachers only get paid for 10 months out of the year. We just happen to spread it out over 12 months. So anything that happens over the summer is optional and above and beyond what is asked from teachers. You know, imagine if you went to a restaurant or to a Costco and you inquired with the staff, oh, have you been trained on how to handle COVID protocols? And they said, well, it was optional. So some of us did, and some of us didn't get that training. But you're welcome to shop in our store, you know, or dine at our restaurant. I feel very concerned about that. And that's the same thing you're seeing here. If it's not mandatory and if it's not uniform and consistent, then how can it be reliable? Especially with something that spreads so easily. So that's, I guess, the question that we're facing now. And are you going to have that training at the same time as when students already come back to school? Or is that too late? I think these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves about what's really safe for both our students and our teachers.
And so another concern too, and I think you were asking this, is about the PPE gear. And, you know, we're expected, teachers were never trained to be nurses or doctors, yet we're going to be in close proximity. We don't know what kind of gear will be provided, how often that gear will be changed, and to be given instructions of how to deal with the virus. We're not trained like this. And so these are big questions too that we have to have answered. Shannon's a preschool teacher. I mean, I cannot tell you how frustrating it is to try to maintain 6-foot distancing with preschool kids. Like, they're going to listen and they're going to want to come up to her and what kind of gear will she have for the entire day and what kind of experience will she have? So that's also a deep concern that we have.
Corey, can I just add to, I want to make it very clear that the professional development opportunities that were provided to me were very limited. And like you said, that it wasn't something that was provided to all schools, all complexes. And so I probably was able to take off advantage of a lot more than what other teachers have been offered. And also the thing for people to realize that me going and checking my email on a daily basis is like asking someone on vacation to be continually connected. So, I really want the public to realize that that the summer months are times when teachers are working second jobs, doing all these other things. I personally have spent my whole summer preparing for this this school year, and I do not feel like I've had a break. So, I'm probably I've probably put in a lot more time than what would be expected of most employees.
Corey, if I can also say, these are new times. A lot of our departments or grade levels need time to plan with each other. They need to be able to say, hey, how are you going to handle these lessons? Or if you're all teaching the same thing, maybe you take this part and I'll take that part. And for a lot of our teachers, their lines are being changed during the summer. So they were expecting to teach a certain grade level or a certain subject as they left school last year. And as they come in this year, a whole new subject or a whole new grade level is being thrust upon them. And so they need that extra time. If I could just go back to some of the other questions. One of them was about the smaller communities. We've seen our smaller communities. When COVID hit Molokai, it was devastating for them, and it caused all kinds of havoc. So if COVID were to come to one of our small communities, it is really going to create havoc. And what are they going to do? They have to be prepared to shut down immediately. With regards to, well, if we don't get what we're asking for, what are we going to do? Well, I'll tell you, a lot of our teachers are waiting to find out because they're counting up their sick leave. They are seeing their financial advisors. Can I retire immediately? And a lot of them, as Shannon said, are planners. If we don't have enough sick leave or if we don't have the financial capability to retire, they're going and they're writing their wills. They're writing because they are afraid. They are deathly afraid. And that is what we don't want to happen. We want to be able to keep and retain as many teachers so that we can continue to teach our keiki throughout all of this. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to point out one more thing, we have brand new teachers coming in that haven't been trained on any of this. And one of the deep concerns we have, to Osa's point, is at some point we need to do a stress test to see how many of our teachers are still getting in the classroom and how many positions we have open. And I know a lot of substitutes are they're very concerned as well, because a lot of our substitutes are retired teachers and older, and it's just not worth it to them. So one of the reasons we also have to take a gradual approach is we need to see how many teachers are going to be there on the first day, how many teachers need to be trained at all. And so this is a big concern. So Kyoki, let's go on to the, go ahead.
Sorry, one final point about PPE. We've also heard that our principals are doing a great job in ordering it, but it's just not coming. It's not arriving. There's a backlog of people ordering throughout the whole country, throughout the whole world. They're not getting it. So they need time to even receive these PPE to be able to distribute to their faculties and staff.
Thank you, folks. Next, we're going to hear from Susan Asuyan from the Honolulu Star Advertiser. Susan.
Hi there. I had two questions. One was, how do you respond to the argument that August is kind of a safe time before the influx of tourists to get kids to come in, get a little training, parents to get their devices so that they can switch to distance learning when, you know, September rolls around and we open up? That was one question. And if you don't mind a second, how did you gauge teacher sentiment on this request to delay? Did you do a little poll, or is it just based on, you know, anecdotal concerns that have been coming in? So first one was August. How do you respond to the argument that it's safe now and we should grab this opportunity to just briefly at least connect?
So let's take that premise, and I've been asked that question. It's almost on the assumption that, number one, when we open up our schools, there will be an increased amount of cases, and we want to deal with that before we deal with tourism that's going to have more cases. And I think that the assumption that we're going to open up our schools and have cases, that's already a problem in itself. To the next question you're asking about the distance learning. So people just think that we can just pop on a video and then we can teach. If you want to have junk lessons and junk learning, then you don't give teachers time to prepare. But what we know is that from day one, we do not know how long we're going to have with our students before there's an outbreak and we need to close our schools. And in countries like South Korea and Israel and Beijing, when they've opened, they've had to shut it down again. And so if we want, and to all the parents that say, I want my kid to learn, we need to make sure that from the very beginning, the first time we see our kids, that we're going to have the lessons ready to go for distance learning. And that's just more than visual. And the other part is our teachers need to learn the platforms. I mean, it's just assuming that all the teachers know how to do virtual learning just out of habit. We haven't been trained. They don't know how to use this thing and how to use it effectively. And so we need to make sure that in each practice, we can take it step by step to do with that one.
And then Susan was also asking about how we came to this decision, Corey.
Yeah, so we've been polling our members. We've been talking to our members. I think that, a lot of our members, they do want to go back to school. They care about their kids, and we all do. But I think there's one thing that the consensus that we have among our teachers, and we've been reaching out through our leaders and doing a lot of conversations. The teachers are concerned about the health and safety, and they're concerned about the health and safety of themselves and of their students. And around that area, that is why, as HSTA, this is the biggest priority that we're pushing. And I do believe that we have strong consensus among our members that that is a priority.
Okay, and next we have Annalisa Burgos from KITV4.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, can you give us an update or at least kind of an overview about the substitute teacher situation? I know if people were going to get sick or when they have to, as cases arise and they have quarantine, what is the plan in place to get substitute teachers in?
And that is a question that needs to be answered. HSTA does not represent substitutes, but we know how important substitutes are in educating our keiki. And so the concern we have, again, is number one is how many teachers are going to show up on day one? We know from our conversations that teachers are retiring early. They're waiting to see what kind of health advice is going, and they may just take off leave. We just recently did a webinar, and on that webinar, there was over 400 teachers on it to find out about accommodations that could be made. So the concerns that we have then is for our subs is how many subs we're going to need, and are they going to be trained? It's like if a substitute has to do multiple classes, are they going to be trained in all the learning programs as well? And we're unsure of that. And then the big concern is this. Part of our agreement in the MOU was dealing with cohorts and the idea of trying to limit exposure. But if a substitute is going in class and is seeing 6 or 7 periods of students, and the next day goes to the next class, and the next day goes to another class, then how many people is this person going to be exposed to, and how many potential people are they exposing? And that's not a question that has been asked. If we were doing this right, we would limit exposure of substitutes as well.
Final call, reporters, any last questions for our panel? We thank you for joining us today. And we thank our members and the public for listening in as well, and let people know that the recording of this entire news conference will be available and archived on the HSTA Facebook page as well as the YouTube channel. And we thank you very much for your interest, and please be safe, take care of each other out there. Aloha.
Thank you all.